There was once a name that made the entire Middle East bow its head, a city so magnificent that the ancients called it the Gate of Heaven, a civilization that gave birth to the first laws, towering ziggurats that reached for the gods, and kings who claimed they were chosen to uphold the order of the universe. Babylon, a name that once stood at the center of the ancient world, brilliant, terrifying, and shrouded in mystery. From Hammurabi and his laws etched into stone, to the hanging gardens floating in the air, to the biblical prophecy of its downfall, Babylon was both real and mirage. But what allowed such an empire to rise from the ashes of Sumer, only to vanish from the map as if it had never existed? Let us uncover the legend of Babylon. From Sumer's dust to Hammurabi's crown, the rise of Babylon. After the collapse of Akkad in chaos and darkness, Mesopotamia entered a long period of fragmentation, lasting nearly 2 centuries. Feeble Sumerian city-states rose and fell, Gutian nomads wandered like phantoms spreading ruin, and memories of a unified empire were little more than whispers in ancient temples. But in that darkness, among the broken shards of civilization, there was one humble city quietly nurturing a colossal ambition to rebuild order and surpass everything Akkad had ever achieved. At first, Babylon was just a small settlement on the banks of the Euphrates, unremarkable among dozens of other Sumerian cities, but its location was unique. It sat precisely at the crossroads of the north-south and east-west trade routes, a stone positioned where every current converged. Grain from old Akkad, copper and tin from the west, cedar wood from Lebanon, and wool from the Zagros. Though not a strong political center, it was where merchants stopped, paid taxes, traded goods, and left behind stories, memories, and remnants of the past. Around 1900 BCE, a new dynasty emerged there, the Amorite dynasty. These were Semitic nomads from northwestern Mesopotamia who had settled down, learned to use cuneiform, worshipped Sumerian gods, and ruled in a distinctly Akkadian way. The most remarkable king of this dynasty was Hammurabi, who reigned from about 1792 to 1750 BCE. When he ascended the throne, Babylon was still a minor power, overshadowed by larger forces like Larsa, Eshnunna, and especially Elam in the east. But Hammurabi was farsighted. He didn't rush into war. Instead, he spent the early years of his reign building infrastructure: dams, irrigation canals, granaries, temples. He passed commercial laws, and, most critically, he recruited talented minds, even from rival territories. Under his rule, Babylon became a new center of learning and faith. Priests, judges, diviners, mathematicians, all were brought together, not to serve religion, but to serve the state. Hammurabi understood that power didn't only lie in armies, but in controlling information and belief. So he encouraged the codification of laws, the revision of ancient myths, and, most importantly, the construction of his own image as the righteous shepherd of the people. But his ambition didn't stop there. Midway through his reign, as neighboring kingdoms weakened due to war and drought, Hammurabi struck. He launched a series of rapid military campaigns, forging alliances with smaller cities to defeat the mighty ones. In just a few years, he conquered Larsa, Mari, Eshnunna, and even Elam, the old rival of Akkad. In the end, Hammurabi became the undisputed ruler of all Mesopotamia, unifying the lands once ruled by Akkad and Sumer into a new empire, the Babylonian Empire. What's astonishing is that although he did nearly what Sargon had done centuries earlier, Hammurabi's method was entirely different. If Sargon ruled by the sword, Hammurabi ruled by law. And in this age, law was not just an administrative tool, it was the highest symbolic weapon of all. That's when he issued the Code of Hammurabi, the most famous legal code in human history, carved into a nearly 2.5-meter basalt stele, with an image of Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, god of justice. This wasn't just law, it was a declaration of divine authority. It told the people, "I do not rule because I am strong. I rule because the gods chose me to protect justice." The code contained over 280 clauses covering every area of life: punishments for theft, murder, and fraud, responsibilities of farmers, wages for doctors, rental fees for donkeys and boats, and even penalties for builders if a house collapsed and killed someone. The laws were harsh, often based on an eye for an eye, but they also protected widows, orphans, and the poor. Why carve it in stone? Because Hammurabi wanted the law to be eternal. He placed the stele in a public square where anyone, literate or not, could see it. It was a symbol that the law stood above even the king. In truth, it was this legal framework that held Babylon together as a multi-ethnic, multilingual empire, where swords were the last resort and law was the unifying force. During Hammurabi's reign, Babylon was not just an administrative capital. It became the cultural and religious heart of Mesopotamia. The Temple of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, was expanded into a massive religious complex, and from there, Marduk was elevated above Enlil and Anu to become the supreme god. This wasn't just theology, it was politics. If Babylon was the center of power, then its god must be the god of all. At the same time, Babylon developed a sophisticated bureaucracy. Provinces were ruled by governors, taxes were standardized, and everything was recorded in writing. Documents from this period reveal an incredibly detailed accounting system, tracking harvest yields, numbers of cattle and sheep, even milk delivered to temples. Babylon did not run on improvisation. It operated like a modern proto-state, structured, controlled, standardized, and most importantly, archived. Hundreds of thousands of clay tablets have been excavated, proving just how paperwork-driven Hammurabi's government really was. But, as with all glorious reigns, the brightest light comes just before sunset. After Hammurabi's death, his successor, Samsu-iluna, lacked the talent to maintain the empire. Rebellions broke out. New forces like the Cassites in the north and Hittites from the west began to rise. Though Babylon was well organized, it was still an empire built around one man, and when that man was gone, the machinery faltered. Around 1595 BCE, the Hittites launched a surprise invasion from Anatolia, sacked Babylon, then quickly withdrew, like a sudden storm. Though they didn't stay, the blow was fatal. The Babylonian Empire collapsed, the land soon fell under Cassite control, and they would rule Babylon for the next 400 years. But what matters most isn't the fall, it's what endured. Babylon's administration, Hammurabi's laws, the Akkadian language, cuneiform script, and the Temple of Marduk all survived, forming a core that could not be erased. And that proves one thing. The legacy of Hammurabi was stronger than the army he once commanded. After Hammurabi's death around 1750 BCE, the Babylonian Empire stood on a fragile edge, caught between preserving its legacy and being crushed beneath its weight. His successor, Samsu-iluna, bore a powerful name but lacked the political influence and brilliance of his father. He inherited a vast empire, but one that was exceedingly fragile. The newly conquered territories had not yet fully accepted Babylonian rule, and every moment of hesitation risked igniting rebellion. From the very beginning of his reign, Samsu-iluna faced a series of uprisings. In the south, cities that had once been cultural hubs of Sumerian civilization, Ur, Uruk, and Larsa, rose in revolt, refusing to obey commands from Babylon. These uprisings were not just political resistance. They were cultural reactions, an effort to preserve Sumerian identity in the face of a growing wave of Semitic influence spreading from Babylon. Samsu-Iluna launched large-scale suppression campaigns, but the high costs of war, prolonged drought, and the exhaustion of the peasant class made it impossible to maintain full control. At the same time, powers from the eastern highlands, such as Elam, and more notably the Cassites, a little-known but patient people, began eyeing Mesopotamia's core like a predator stalking its prey. But the decline of the Babylonian Empire did not come from a single catastrophic blow. It came gradually, like a fever festering beneath the skin. There were no grand disasters, just accumulated fatigue, tax burdens piling up, drying farmlands, trade goods that never arrived, and clay tablets that stopped being inscribed with the same regularity. In the ancient world, loyalty was measured in grain and security. A kingdom that lost control over its borders lost the trust at its center. Under Samsu-Iluna and his successors, Babylon slowly retreated to its central region, abandoning the outer provinces to decay. Later kings like Abi-Eshu and Ammi-Ditana tried to uphold Hammurabi's style of governance, issuing new laws, portraying themselves as righteous leaders, but real power was gone. They were like actors continuing a play on a stage that had rotted beneath them. Around 1595 BCE, the unthinkable happened. An army from distant Anatolia, the Hittites, led by King Mursili I, marched straight into Mesopotamia. Their goals were unclear, perhaps to attack northern cities, or perhaps to punish Babylon for alliances with their enemies. But the result was unforgettable. They stormed Babylon, looted temples, damaged the palace, and then vanished like lightning. They didn't stay to rule, but their blow struck like a fatal wound to an already frail empire. In the power vacuum that followed, the Cassites, nomads from the Zagros Mountains, quietly stepped in. They did not slaughter, they did not pillage. They occupied a weakened Babylon and stayed. This was a strange turning point. A foreign people with no native Akkadian tongue, no Sumerian tradition, and no deep roots in the land, became the legal heirs to one of the most glorious civilizations in human history. And instead of tearing down what they found, they learned, copied, and preserved almost the entire cultural, administrative, and religious structure left behind by the Babylonians. The Cassite dynasty lasted nearly 400 years, longer than any prior dynasty in Mesopotamia, yet they remain one of history's most forgotten. The reason is simple: they left no monumental innovations. They were custodians, not creators. They preserved the code of Hammurabi, continued using cuneiform script, worshipped Marduk, maintained schools, and expanded trade networks all the way to the Mediterranean. In a chaotic world, they were a force of stability. But because they made no dramatic breakthroughs, history did not glorify them the way it did Akkad or Assyria. Remarkably, under Cassite rule, Babylon remained a center of civilization. Temples remained active, the arts continued to thrive, and Akkadian language diplomatic correspondence was still sent across the ancient world, from Egypt to the Hittites, from Assyria to Cyprus. Kings like Kurigal-Zufur and Burnaburiash II were even addressed as brothers by the pharaohs of Egypt, exchanging gold, gems, and horses as equals on the world stage. A prime example is the Amarna letters, a collection of over 300 clay tablets found in Egypt, documenting diplomatic exchanges between the Egyptian pharaohs and Mesopotamian kings, all written in Akkadian. These letters show that even without the military power Hammurabi once wielded, Babylon remained a cultural and linguistic powerhouse. something few civilizations manage after falling from political dominance. The Cassites also made improvements to administration. They restructured provinces, established new archive centers, developed the use of cylinder seals, and formally declared the cult of Marduk as the state religion. From then on, Babylon was no longer just a city. It became a symbol. And Marduk, once a local god, was elevated to cosmic supremacy. During religious festivals, the king had to visit Marduk's temple to be confirmed as ruler, a ritual that showed politics and divine authority had become inseparable. The irony is this: though the Cassites were not originally Babylonian, they were the first to conceptualize Babylonia as a continuous national identity. Before them, Babylon was simply a city that had risen to imperial status under Hammurabi. But under Cassite rule, it became a fixed civilizational hub, a place every future generation would return to, regardless of who ruled. Because of their long-lasting stewardship, when the Cassites were finally overthrown, Babylonian civilization did not disappear. It merely changed hands. When the Cassite dynasty ended around 1155 BCE, due to invasions from Elam and the rise of local powers like the Chaldeans, Babylon once again entered a cycle of collapse and rebirth. Yet what's miraculous is this: no matter how often it was destroyed, Babylon was always rebuilt. Dynasties changed, languages evolved, the world shifted, but the name Babylon endured, a living definition of civilizational resilience. Thus, post-Hammurabi Babylon was not a retreat, but a powerful demonstration of how culture and statehood can be transmitted across generations, races, and crises. If Hammurabi was the founder of the state, then the Cassites were its stewards. And what's most admirable is this: they didn't erase the past, they turned it into a standard for life. If the Babylon of Hammurabi was a lesson in the rule of law, then the era of Nebuchadnezzar II was a grand symphony of power, art, and the obsession with immortality. In human history, few cities have been built and reborn across centuries, but Babylon was not merely rebuilt. It was elevated to the height of legend, once again becoming the radiant heart of the ancient world under the iron will and timeless vision of a single man. Nebuchadnezzar did not descend from the ancient lines of Hammurabi or the Cassites. He was the son of Nabopolassar, a Chaldean general who rose up from the south, overthrew the crumbling Assyrian Empire, and re-established Babylonian independence in 626 BCE. When Nabopolassar died, Nebuchadnezzar ascended the throne, inheriting not only his father's legacy, but also his unfulfilled ambition to make Babylon not just the capital of an empire, but a symbol that would endure beyond time itself. From the very beginning, Nebuchadnezzar demonstrated his military genius and political acuity. He defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish, a decisive confrontation that granted him control over the entire Levant, and continued expanding his territory all the way to the Mediterranean. Within a few short years, he had brought under his rule most of the great city-states from Judah and Phoenicia to much of Syria. But unlike conquerors who brought only fear, Nebuchadnezzar brought home something far more valuable: talent. He took artisans, engineers, sages, and cultural treasures back to Babylon. Thanks to this, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar entered an unprecedented golden age. The city was completely redesigned, streets paved with fired bricks, canals flowing throughout, and city walls so thick that 4 horse-drawn chariots could ride abreast along their tops. The city gates became not mere defenses but works of art. Foremost among them the Ishtar Gate, a colossal archway covered in shimmering blue-glazed tiles, inlaid with golden dragons and lions symbolizing the gods Marduk and Ishtar. It was not just an entryway into Babylon, It was a declaration of the glory of a civilization that had survived millennia of war and chaos. Nebuchadnezzar also rebuilt the Atemenanki ziggurat, believed to be the inspiration for the Tower of Babel in the Bible. The tower was said to be so high it touched the heavens, a symbol of the connection between humans and the divine, between Babylon and the cosmos. The Temple of Marduk was expanded. Worship rituals became more elaborate, more solemn, and tightly organized. To neighboring nations, Babylon had become not merely a city, but the cosmic center of the universe, a sacred order where divine law was not only written on stone, but etched into collective memory. However, Nebuchadnezzar's achievements extended beyond construction. Under his rule, the Babylonian Empire reached an administrative peak. The tax system was codified, roads were expanded for trade, and regional administrative centers were established throughout the land. Records from his reign reveal astonishing detail. Every sack of grain, every bolt of cloth, every silver ingot was meticulously documented and sealed with exquisitely crafted cylinder seals. This administrative machine remained functional long after his death, a testament to Nebuchadnezzar not just as a builder of monuments, but as an architect of governance. And then, amid all these wonders, emerged one of the greatest mysteries of human history, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. No one knows for certain if they truly existed. No Babylonian text survives that describes the gardens in detail. Yet Greek historians, especially Herodotus and Berossus, wrote of a garden suspended in the air, with tiered terraces of greenery, flowing water, and birdsong amid the desert heat, a marvel the world had never seen. According to legend, Nebuchadnezzar built this garden for his queen, Amytis, who came from the lush, mountainous land of Media and longed for her verdant homeland amid the dry bricks and arid winds of Babylon. If the tale is true, then it was not merely a romantic gesture, it was a technological miracle far ahead of its time. To lift water to such heights, the Babylonians would have had to use a complex system of screws, pulleys, and reservoirs, technology not widely used until the Roman era. But for Babylon, the impossible always seemed like the starting point. Even though modern archaeologists have yet to find definitive evidence of the Hanging Gardens, the name alone has forever etched itself into history as an eternal dream of beauty, abundance, and humankind's power to reshape nature. And yet, every light casts a shadow. In the final years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he appears to have grown increasingly superstitious and paranoid. Records show he ordered the construction of new temples, commanded scholars to rewrite ancient myths, restructured religious ceremonies, and punished harshly those suspected of defying the sacred order. Some religious texts claim he believed he was chosen by the god Marduk to restore cosmic balance, a conviction that left him isolated in the very palace he had built. After Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BCE, his successors lacked both the strength and vision to carry on his immense legacy. Factions began to vie for power, formerly subjugated territories rebelled, and the nobility grew increasingly dominant while the priesthood fractured. Torn between loyalty to Marduk and the rising political ideas emerging from the east, Babylon entered a period of quiet unrest, its majestic facade concealing deepening cracks within. And then, from the Iranian plateau, a new and unfamiliar name began to rise: Cyrus the Great of Persia. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar II, the glory of Babylon began to fade, slowly but irreversibly. None of his successors possessed the political might, military brilliance, or cultural vision needed to sustain the height that Babylon had just reached. Within just a few decades, the throne became the focus of conflict among noble factions, priesthoods, and military forces. Loyalty to the god Marduk, once a pillar of Babylonian ideology, was now exploited as a political tool. Though Babylon still appeared majestic from the outside, it had become a grand body decaying from within. Meanwhile, to the east, a new power, young and ambitious, was quietly rising. The Persian Empire, under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, rapidly expanded from the Iranian plateau to Asia Minor, defeating both the Medes and the Lydians. By 539 BCE, Babylon had become the next target, not just as part of territorial conquest, but because of its symbolic weight. Whoever controlled Babylon would hold the very heart of Mesopotamia. The reigning king of Babylon at the time was Nabonidus, a controversial figure in history. He was not descended from Nebuchadnezzar's line, having come to power through political alliances. Nabonidus had once been a priest, and both the nobility and traditional clergy despised him for favoring the moon god Sin over Marduk, the long-revered supreme deity of Babylon. He abandoned the city for years to live in the oasis of Tema, leaving rule in the hands of his son, Belshazzar. This act deeply angered the religious elite and the general populace, who saw him as a heretic. It was in this context that the army of Cyrus the Great approached Babylon, not just with weapons, but with masterful psychological warfare and propaganda. Cyrus distributed leaflets, written in Akkadian, promising to restore the power of Marduk, respect traditions, reduce taxes, and allow exiled peoples to return to their homelands. His campaign did not merely target politics, it struck at the collective soul of Babylon. When the Persian army reached the gates, there was little resistance. On a night in October 539 BCE, according to sources like the Cyrus Cylinder, Persian forces diverted the Euphrates River during a festival and entered the city via the dried riverbed, without bloodshed. Babylon, the dazzling center of a great civilization, fell in utter silence. What's remarkable is that Cyrus did not loot or destroy. Instead, he restored temples, respected local beliefs, and declared, "Marduk himself has chosen me to liberate Babylon from the impious Nabonidus." This declaration is inscribed on the Cyrus Cylinder, regarded as the world's first charter of human rights. Cyrus entered the temple of Marduk not as a conqueror, but as a rightful heir. As a result, the people of Babylon did not see him as an invader, but as a restorer of order. Yet, even with this respectful treatment, from that moment on, Babylon ceased to be the center of power. The Persian Empire was not governed from Babylon, but from Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana. Babylon became just a province, important, yes, but no longer the soul of an empire. In the centuries that followed, it remained a hub of culture, scholarship, and religion, but as a shadow of its former self. There were no more kings building towers to the heavens, no more Akitu festivals where Marduk's statue was paraded through golden streets, no more laws carved into stone proclaiming cosmic justice. Then, in the 4th century BCE, a new wind blew from the west. Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian king who conquered the known world. After defeating the Persians, Alexander entered Babylon and fell in love with it. Records show he intended to make Babylon the capital of a new world empire, bridging east and west, Greece and the Orient. He ordered restorations of its buildings, reopened festivals, and lived in Babylon as a native king. But fate was cruel. Alexander died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BCE, at just 32 years old. His death marked the true final chapter for the city that had once been the heart of mankind. After him, his generals fought for control, and Babylon was abandoned. Rivers shifted, trade moved to newer cities, temples closed, and slowly layers of dust covered the bricks, columns, and cuneiform tablets. Babylon, once the center of the world, was buried under the sands of history. Yet Babylon did not die. It became a symbol. In the Bible, Babylon is the image of arrogance and downfall. In Jewish literature, it is the place of bitter exile, but also the beginning of apocalyptic vision. In Persian memory, it is a revered ancestral heritage. In Western imagination, it is the city of pleasure, sin, and ruin. Whether loved or hated, Babylon remains alive in the human mind, an eternal monument. Today, the ruins of Babylon lie in central Iraq, near the town of Hilla. Excavations since the 19th century have brought new light to the ancient city. The Ishtar Gate has been reconstructed at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. Clay tablets, astronomical charts, legal documents, and literary texts lie scattered across major museums of the world, fragments of an empire that once dreamed of touching the heavens. And so, Babylon, though it has fallen many times, though it lies silent in the desert, lives on as part of the DNA of human civilization. Not because of its armies, not because of its riches, but because Babylon was the place where humanity first asked the fundamental questions. What is order? What is justice? Do we live in a universe governed by laws, or simply a chaos veiled in ritual? Babylon may have vanished like dust, but the questions it left behind still echo to this day.